Welcome to our broadcast tonight, an hour on the battle of the sexes. When Lorena Bobbitt made the unkindest cut of all, it revealed the rage that was lurking beneath the surface of male and female relations. Some women hailed her as a hero. Men reacted with horror. No one could remember the last time a woman had violated a man so completely. Why has the conflict on the sexual battlefield suddenly come out into the open? And can the long-fraught fears about date rape and harassment ever resolve themselves? Joining me now are best-selling author Naomi Wolf. Her new book is Fire with Fire, The New Female Power and How It Will Change the 21st Century. Katie Roiphe, her book, The Morning After Sex, Fear, and Feminism on Campus, caused a national stir with a new take on date rape. Christopher Hitchens, contributing editor for Vanity Fair. Tad Friend, contributing editor for Esquire. And Rebecca Walker, founder of the feminist organization Third Wave. Welcome. I want to go here from the broad and the general, a sense of what's happening, to some of the specific things and the way it plays out. And we've got a series of books here that you've written in news and magazine pieces. I start with you, Tad, because of this piece that's coming out in the February Esquire, in which you really look at where feminism now and reflect on some of the people sitting at this table and what they are saying, as well as some of the incidents that I talked about. Tell me where you think we are and what's happening.
You said rage in your open, and I think there is a lot of rage out there. Lorena Bobbitt is certainly an example of it. But I think one of the things I discovered when I was doing my piece was that the women at this table particularly, there is a sense that rage may have gone too far, and that the radical feminism of Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin sort of pushed the envelope where men were basically scurrying for the exits, and that and these women here that I've spoken with, there's a sense that sex is not necessarily bad, that men are not necessarily evil, and that it's time to put that message out there and to kind of bring the sexes together again.
Naomi?
I think it depends on what you do with that rage. I mean, I think rage can be an incredibly healing and important force. I mean, that's where Katie and I differ immensely in our definition of victim feminism, for example. I think it's very important to name the ways in which women have been put down, harassed, harmed, raped, but that, as you say, it's incredibly important not to use that knowledge to create an identity of victimization that blinds us to our strengths. I think that men are in crisis right now for good reason. And that feminism has got to stop demonizing all men as a gender on the basis of the crimes of some men, and absolutely create a kind of pro-sex, pro-pleasure, pro-eroticism stance, as well as hold criminals accountable for sex crimes. I think that men are in crisis because women are not sitting passively as the evil backlash hits us over the head, where it's hard for us to understand the nature of our immense power. But I believe that since the Hill-Thomas hearings, we've seen a kind of spontaneous uprising among women in this country that is shifting the balance of the power between the sexes. Women have won a roster of legislative victories. I call this the gender quake we're in now. Patriarchy is being dismantled in little ways as well as big. Everything from women and children telling men's secrets, all the way to victories like the Violence Against Women Act and a pro-feminist president. And I think that women have got to understand that men are digging in their heels not because they are all evil misogynists, but because no ruling class has ever yielded power voluntarily. And I think women have, in a way, got to escalate their political inroads, but at the same time have a feminism that is scrupulously fair and even compassionate to men. So that as we dismantle the masculine empire, we don't create the kind of moral impasses of calling Lorena Bobbitt a heroine, as if, because someone's been a victim, she can't also be an aggressor. And so that's why a lot of Fire with Fire is an attack on that strand of feminism, and it is a minority strand, but it does exist, that can't tell the difference between hating sexism and hating men, targeting sexual assault, and painting all sexuality with the same dark brush.
Rebecca, how do you come to where we are?
I think what we're talking about is very interesting. I think that what we're seeing now is a move from an understanding of, say, the gender war, which is male against female, it's been previously defined, to a real understanding of power, and that really it's not about male against female and female against male, even though I think there is a war being waged against women. But I think that we're starting to understand, with the help of black feminists like Bell Hooks and Gloria Anzaldúa, and certainly Naomi's book, that the power imbalance is what's really crucial here, and that is a power imbalance that we see between men and women, between white people and people of color, between straight people and people who have different sexual orientations. It's a difference between people who have access to privilege and power and people who don't, or who have less.
Can the move to equality, whatever that is, can it be negotiated, or does it have to be seized?
I think both. I think that we're in the process of negotiating it and seizing it. I mean, you know.
I mean, I think I was certainly one of the very few men who I knew, maybe the only one, who had any sympathy for the tempestuous Mrs. Bobbitt. Because if you recall the first statement that she made, basically a poor woman, fairly uneducated, an immigrant to this country, not very powerful, not very well plugged in, not very well connected, very unhappy and lonely. First statement she makes to the police about the organ which she'd separated from Mr. Bobbitt was that while it was attached to him, it had been pretty much no good to her. That, as she put it, he always finishes first and never cares about me.
Never waits.
In other words, it wasn't that she felt threatened or menaced by this said organ, or cudgeled or brutalized by it, but sort of let down by it, disappointed by it. I thought more men should have paid more attention to that.
But you're not exonerating her.
The way that, no, I mean, obviously she was, in every sense, a pathetic and probably quite a nasty woman, it seems to me, but as much to be pitied as anything else. The only way that you can't get any sense out of this discussion is if you assume that, that she was wrong to say that. In other words, that women are asexual, which is the assumption made, it seems to me, in a lot of the date rape literature and a lot of the Catherine MacKinnon and Andrea Dworkin type commentary, that women are basically not sexed, and that...
They don't say that.
No, this is where the reason why a lot of men are being sort of driven to the right, so to speak, the sexual right, is because they sort of know that's not true.
Is the sexual right, I mean, where is the sexual right? I mean, is it...
Men hating women and thinking that they all plan to cut their things off.
Or the attacks on feminism and all of that, is that where men are treated to the right?
And the fear and the boring endless sort of Rush Limbaugh type joking about it that's catching on, is that men sort of know that that's not true and that it's hypocritical. And they know that women would, or they ought to know, I would like to argue anyway, that women would be the losers if the chaperone came back on campus and for teenagers.
That's something that I've been trying to argue, is that a lot of contemporary feminism, certainly not, and I'd agree with you, Naomi, certainly not all of contemporary feminism, but a lot of it does seem to emphasize a kind of female sexual vulnerability, the idea that women are sort of always about to be violated, always offended by someone's dirty joke. And I think that this is dangerous precisely because we are sort of promoting this idea of women as asexual, things like the Antioch rules that, you know, got a lot of attention earlier this fall.
Explain the Antioch rules.
Okay, the Antioch
rules, which was on the cover of the front page of the New York Times.
Right, which was basically a code of conduct saying that you have to ask permission at every stage of the sexual act, and that is, can I kiss you? Can I hold your hand? Can I unbutton your blouse? And not just, and I talk to students at Antioch, not just the first time, but, you know, at every sexual act. And I think the problem with these rules is the idea that, you know, which is really the idea, first of all, that women are unable to express themselves and communicate, and also the idea that sex, every sexual encounter is so dangerous that we really need this kind of protection, and that's...
But I don't think at all that's what most feminists are saying, or that even that those rules...
Nor indeed what I was saying, although you called me a rape crisis feminist because I pointed out that there is, in fact, a rape crisis epidemic. What my problem with the way you cast sort of all women who talk about sexual victimization as sort of prudish Puritans is that it seems to me that your sometimes quite important argument that in many ways dovetails with some parts of Fire with Fire is founded on sand, because you want to wish away the fact that there really is a rape crisis epidemic.
Well,
I didn't make up this,
pointed out, we all want to wish it away. I mean, I'm not denying...
But I think it's more ethical to say there is a sexual assault epidemic, and how do we acknowledge that, fight it, and claim that women are sexual agents, sexually curious, can be sexually objectifying, that we are not saints, nor should we have to be.
Look, just before we leave this Antioch theme, because I was as surprised as you were too, to read on the front of the New York Times the words, "May I put my finger in?" I never expected to read that on the front of the good old grey Times. And I noticed that it followed instantly. It was stage 4 after "May I remove your bustier?" No doubt they call it in Antioch. I don't know what it is. Anyhow, I thought to myself, there are at least 3 things wrong with this. One is, from the male point of view, it's insulting because you have to do all the work. on this assumption. From the female point of view, I think it's insulting because it means the men also have to do all the talking. And third, and let's see if we can say this on the air or not, it seemed to me that it had, and not accidentally, it had abolished the clitoris.
Right.
There was no.
Say it again.
It was. Let me put it like this then: the clitoris had been elided in this. Now I can't believe that that's an accident, because if you mention that, you mention that women are, in some sense, keenly motivated for sex themselves, and that's the thing I think Antioch is as reluctant to face as the perhaps whoever is the sub-editor.
Let me
of the
just
New
say a
York
couple of
Times.
things. Go ahead, Katie. Now.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, obviously we can all look at Antioch and say Antioch is sort of an extreme. I mean, this is not the representation of sex on campus. But the reason I think it's interesting is because this is an extreme that captures something of the spirit of the times. It captures something of, and you talk to students on campuses, and they really are, you know, sort of talking about sex in these kind of terms and talking about consent in these kind of terms.
Kinds of terms?
Right, and the idea that men are the sort of sexual aggressive animals and all men are potential rapists. And by the way, signs at Columbia saying, advertising a Take Back the Night March saying too many penises got away. You know, and this is Columbia University, and I think that
I'm supposed to say
idea.
ouch when that's said, you see, but I just think, oh, please, is all I
Well, I mean, I think, Katie, you know, I've been on college campuses at the same time that you've been. I think we both are around the same year. And the women that I talk to, that are my friends that have gone to school with me, don't say things like that. When we talk about sex, we talk about what we want. We talk about the orgasm. We talk about clitoris. We talk about, you know, we talk about all the different ways that we can get pleasure. We talk about how we should broaden our vocabulary around pleasure. And I think that that is a direct result of the rape crisis feminists that you identify, and that in raising our awareness about the reality of rape and date rape, we have become more empowered about how we can negotiate that relationship,
Wouldn't you also
as opposed
say
to
that
being less empowered.
One
which is what I
second. Let
think that
me make one point. We haven't gotten your point about and the new view that you have about date rape. Is the risk of what with respect to women?
I think that there is the risk in, and I'm not denying that rape exists, that someone can be raped by someone they know.
In the New York Times.
I do not deny it. I think you're not reading carefully. Oh, I don't believe that there's a rape crisis. But I do think rape exists. Rape is obviously a problem.
There's a rape crisis.
A rape crisis in terms
finish
of a
my.
rape
Let me
epidemic or-
finish.
you know, finish.
Maybe if I just finish my point,
okay.
and then we can argue against it.
pedantic, old-fashioned.
Let's argue against it now.
No, it's like family
We
values.
can argue about it before I even articulate.
Yeah, finish it, which is the reason I interrupted Naomi. Go ahead. Finish the point.
If you
I'm
must,
arguing that there's a danger in projecting in the images we're projecting about women, in the language that we're talking about this to 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds as they come to the university. And as an example, you know, I said I don't think we should be teaching every 18-year-old as they enter university that 1 in 4 women will be the victim of rape or attempted rape before they graduate from the university, before the age of 21.
1 in 4 will be the attempted. It's 1 in 4 have experienced.
Before the age of, right, well, will be and have been.
And
or
you
sort
read
of
that
have.
study pretty seriously.
Pretty seriously. I
Well,
mean, this
I call to task.
we can. I mean, I don't agree. I mean,
Don't
I've
let
read
numbers
it.
get in your way.
No, I think that the assumptions behind those numbers are what I'm questioning, and I'm pointing out, and I believe those numbers are seriously flawed for the reasons that we may or may not want to get into the technical
Well, I think we
details.
should
But
get into them.
I do
I think
think
it's
that
important.
the problem is that what we're teaching. My point is that we're teaching women that, you know, they need to be worried when they go out on a date, that all men are potential rapists, that there's a danger in projecting this idea. I mean, and I quoted the American College Health Association standard pamphlet, which says, when someone starts to offend you, on their women's side of the column, when someone starts to offend you, tell them firmly and early. Now, this is what they're telling women, and I compared this in an early piece I wrote to a Victorian Guide to Conduct, and I really think that you hear these sort of echoes of a sort of either Victorian or a 1950s idea about men who just want sex or sort of pushing and pushing, and women who are resisting.
You have inherited a feminism that is kind of the dark mirror of the bright mirror of feminism of the 70s. It's true that in the 80s, theories that make pretty important sense on paper, like Andrew Dworkin's and Catherine McKinnon's theories about male dominance and female subordination socially, and that difference being made sexy, that translated in a way that's caused a lot of damage to feminist discussion about sexuality. All sex is rape. All men are rapists. I remember growing up in a feminism that was about pleasure, desire, expansiveness. It was very much informed by the gay and lesbian movement, in which an army of lovers cannot fail. And I was going to say to you, I think that our take on eroticism and our understanding that we've got to bring back joy and delight, and I've been wailed on this, but fun into feminist struggle, and that pleasure doesn't diminish the seriousness of political advancement, but intensifies it, that's a generational thing. We're younger, we're daughters of a lot of the second wave feminists, and because of their critique of the dark side of sexuality, I think we're free to say, go girl.
Right. But I also think that, for me, historically, the mentors that I've had in feminism, Bell Hooks, Gloria Steinem, Alice Walker, my mother included, have not been afraid of their sexual power, have not been, on the contrary, have embraced pleasure, have said exactly what you just said.
Well, how did the idea develop? The idea developed that they didn't, because to read you and to have read Tad's piece, it is this notion that I read is that now in the 90s, women who are feminists, who believe who believe all of the sort of most of the movement forward of feminism, found it necessary to say in 1993 to accept this and to look at how women have been victimized is not to say that we are very much sexual beings, and we have and want a very healthy sexual pleasure and equality and
I would take it even further. See, I see your view as retrogressive in a way, to tell you the truth, because you're still letting men decide what gets done. I think that what women have to do...
How am I letting... I'm just curious. How am I letting men decide what gets done?
Well, it's like, a bad night, losing control or whatever, just brush it off. When, let's face it, it's not feminists who have created this anxiety. It's AIDS, it's viruses. I could sleep...
I talk about AIDS.
I talk about AIDS
statistics
in my
are
book.
real because rape is real. Rape is defined in most states.
Okay, but let's not have an argument. We're arguing against a straw man that is not me.
I'm
not saying that rape is not exists.
Can I say a word in defense of Katie Roifer? Yes, because it seems to me, I'm not trying to be gallant, believe me.
Gallantry becomes you, Christopher.
I'm getting on, you see, a bit. And indeed, my decade was, as must be only too painfully obvious, the 60s, when feminism began. And I remember being present at some of this.
It didn't begin in the 60s. It began about 1790.
I perfectly well. I know even Mary Wollstonecraft.
Oh, good.
Yes, I know that. But for people around this table, I think it could be said that's when it began.
Yeah.
So you'll allow my
Please, your point is...
Yes. What I remember was violently resisting, all of us, different ways, the idea that the university could be in loco parentis, as it wanted to call it. So the university would play the role of your parents. And if you had a beef against another student of any kind, it was considered kind of babyish to want to go to the dean the entire time and complain about your feelings. But now it seems to me that not just on sexual matters, but on quite a lot of other things lumped under the heading of correctitude, everyone in the university seems to want to have more authority over themselves, to have more complaints procedures, to have more therapy and more litigation. And I would say, for heaven's sake, there's enough of all that in the wider society as it is. And you can't justify this by reference to microorganisms, I'm sorry to say. It's not viruses that are making people behave this way. It's a regression to infantilism that's going on. And I think it's a real shame. Crying shame. So morally, I thought she made that point excellently in her book.
Responsibility for our actions. I think that's a sort of...
And not to do that, you're suggesting makes women be perceived as weaker.
I think it makes it less powerful.
Okay,
I think it's sort of insulting to say that...
I don't think anyone argues with you about that. I still think that we've got to take the image of a woman as sexual agent a step further and say that we should own our dark side, too. One of the things of some feminist thinking that I attack, and I think it's sort of an interesting dialogue with some of the things you're saying, is that feminism in the 80s in some ways cast all men as brutal, rapacious beasts, all women as innocent angels, and what this does is it creates a feminism in which women don't own their dark side, and in some sense don't own their power. And I just want to say, I think we have to own that we can be just as aggressive and territorial and sexually exploitive as men. In Fire with Fire, I talk about how there are pornographic magazines aimed at heterosexual women in Britain and Australia that are outselling Penthouse. There's a sex industry burgeoning aimed at women. I mean,
and
we
what
are
does all
saying
that say?
It says that we are not better than men, and we have to junk a feminism of sexual superiority. And this explains why so many, of female sexual superiority. This explains why a lot of women are alienated from feminism, it seems to me. I traveled around the country asking why it is that about twice as many women passionately endorse equality as are willing to call themselves feminists. And one reason is they perceive that the conversation, which used to be about women and men as equals, is now sometimes cast as female moral superiority and fragility and helplessness and male evil and brutality. And this one makes a lot of women and men want to throw up their hands.
Do you believe was that what, say, was being said in some of the books that were written during the 80s, whether it was a beauty myth or whether it was...
I take responsibility in a way for being part of...
A backlash?
Look, the 80s were a dark time for feminism and women in general. You did have to be very black and white and to shout in order to get hurt at all. And I think that the beauty myth stressed women's victimization. All of that is true. Women absolutely are systematically victimized. But if I were going to add a coda to it, I would also look at women's agency, creativity, curiosity. And in Fire with Fire, I look at not just how half empty the glass is, which is what feminist discourse has been doing in the 80s, but also at the fact that it's now half full enough for us to begin to tip the balance of power between the sexes.
Two things I need to say here. I don't want this just to be a discussion about feminism. I want to really I want to go beyond that, and with that as part of the values that we're talking about. But the subject matter here is where are we in terms of the conflict between men and women, putting feminism as one context for that. And I want to specifically point to the piece that you wrote and bring that forward and back to the center of the table.
Well, one thing I think is interesting, I think women, I think men, liberal men are put in a sort of, or liberal enlightened men are put in a sort of odd position of being sort of feeling guilty and saying, yes, those are all good points, we agree, and feeling like, well, you know, I apologize for that frat guy, you know, I feel bad, but it's sort of you feel like you're in a reactive position. I think most of the women here would feel more sort of spiritually connected with women who's being carried upstairs at a frat party at a college than the men here would feel, like Christopher and I would feel with that guy who's carrying her upstairs. And so you're sort of placed in an opposition of feeling like, gee, I didn't do it, it wasn't me, and I apologize, and I won't do it again.
No, I think you can be much more affirmative than that, Chad, if I may say so. I mean, I don't think I know any guy worthy of the name, so to speak, who hasn't at one time or another in his life said to another guy, you heard the lady, leave her alone. Shut up. Move on, you know. I mean, that's part of what it is to be a man, is to be able to do that. And therefore, I think, and by the way, can I mention a piece I've written, since everyone else is plugging their stuff?
Go ahead.
I've got a piece coming up soon about the work of a feminist author who isn't here, but who I admire very much, called Elizabeth Fox Genovese.
Yes.
And she's reviewed you, in fact, hasn't she? I think so. Now, she says one of the reasons why so many women are not describing themselves as feminists these days is because it's not relevant to them, because the struggle for existence for women at the moment is quite grim, and it's usually centered on the very important fact of bringing up children. And not only can you not get hold of a kid without a man, but you have a very hard time bringing one up without a guy. And many of these women, I think, of the working class, if I can use another phrase that's hardly ever heard on TV, like clitoris and penis and so on.
Working class?
Working class. They often hear that. You know, they think of feminism as something that maybe is bad-mouthing their brothers and their husbands and their fathers and other hard-working guys who they know and quite like.
This is another complaint also of a lot of African-American feminists who say that white middle-class feminism has been cast as women against men, and that's why I think our generation of feminists is very interested in saying this is not a gender struggle of women against men. This is about women and men against gender injustice.
Well, let me just ask this question then to all of you. Are we on the wrong track here? If we look at the Bobbitt case and we look at all kinds of things, are we wrong to say there seems to be, in the 1990s, a conflict between men and women?
It's a death grip. I mean, I believe we're in a civil war, but it's not just a war against women. It certainly is a war against women. It's also a war against men and masculine privilege. And that's why I think that feminism has to start being so scrupulously fair. I see that the world of men is dividing into two groups.
Okay.
The egalitarians like you guys who know that a new age is dawning and you're working at it, and the patriarchalists like Rush Limbaugh who are digging in their heels. Understandably, because equality for women really does mean that men lose some status, lose some money.
It's so hard to think of Rush Limbaugh as patriarchal. I'm sorry, I can't do
But
it
he'd
with a
like to
straight
think
face.
All right, I don't want to make Rush Limbaugh the subject of
not
this
talk
party
about
either.
Rush
You want to jump in on this? Because I really want to find out if there is a rage, which you're saying a death grip, how does it play itself out? And are we making too much of Lorena Bobbitt and what happened in that particular instance when there are all kinds of examples of people who've been mutilated before, especially women.
She came along and she's a perfect symbol, and I think that's why people are, she sort of performed this act which was so kind of metaphorically laden, and that's why people are interested. But I think the truth in this is that anger, and I'm sort of shocked because
the anger of women.
The anger of women against men, and also I think the reaction. What's also interesting about this is the reaction of men. And I think this is what Naomi was sort of getting at, a reaction of men who are also getting angry. And I think that we have people, we have playwrights like David Mamet, who I think has probably been the most eloquent, at least in Oleana, in sort of expressing that anger. Expressing the anger that now, and I think, I'm sort of interested because I've gotten letters from men who are in prisons, and I've gotten letters from Wall Street bankers and letters from professors, and they all come down to sort of be the same letter, which is sort of amazing because they're different languages. But what they're saying is, it's not okay to be masculine anymore. Like, how am I supposed to be a man? Yeah. It's okay for women to wear lipstick and flirt and have power lunches and be strong, but men do not have those options because...
Let me come back to Tad, because you went out and sampled all these people that you talked to, and some lesbians and feminists and combinations of all of the things, and what seemed to come out of that piece for me was not sort of a rage against men, but an assertion of sexuality.
But I agree with Katie's point, I think, in the sense that, yes, it was an assertion of female sexuality, and in some sense, the dark side that Naomi talked about.
That is my point.
Well, we should be welcoming. I think men are welcoming. I think Christopher and I would probably both welcome that. I think the reason you're not hearing a lot of male voices in this discussion is that
there's no male Anna Quindlen or something.
And there's no men's movement.
There is no men's movement. The men's movement is men sitting around in the woods barking at the moon and beating their chests in sweat lodges.
But that's not
understood.
But just wait a few seconds. That's the next thing that's going to happen.
What?
Well, we've been waiting for a men's movement for a long time.
The infantilizing I was talking about is going to happen. Men will say, well, if women can go to the dean if they feel they've been felt up or whatever, I'm going to start complaining too. Everyone's going to start being a victim.
We have the Menendez
men will want to share in the victimhood business. It will be unstoppable and completely negative. It's very boring.
Does the victim business, is that what, this is about sexual empowerment and sexual agency. And economic empowerment. Why do we, is all that you are saying, why is it necessarily lead us to a giant conflict between men and women?
I hope that I'm leading us out of a giant conflict between men and women.
And who's leading us into a conflict between men and women?
Well, I think
power structure as it stands.
Women are dismantling male power and privilege, and no one likes that.
Well, give me an example in terms of in the workplace,
are, gay and lesbians
dismantling the male power structure, and how does that play it out? Because so many men are used to only certain sexual.
Well, we're used to having straight, white, privileged men in positions of power all across the board.
Being unquestioned.
Cultural power, political power, economic power. Now all of the different movements are really encouraging people to take and claim their own power as a person of color, as a woman, as a lesbian, as a transgender person. There is no longer a kind of
monolithic.
And okay, let me just understand. Help me.
Okay, we'll
and okay, thank you.
I wish. What can we do for
just
you?
Like your mother.
We're looking forward to working with you.
All right. No, let me hold on one second. So, all right. So across the board, in the sweep of history over the last period of time, the 21st century, in the 20th century, the sweep of history, and feminism is the most important movement, the women's movement, the most important movement that we've all felt has witnessed a gaining of power by women in the workplace and a lot of other places. And part of that process has led to grabbing power from men. All right?
Working for power.
And working from power. And therefore, now it's reached the sexual arena. Yes?
Certainly. Look at one thing that patriarchy has rested on is women and children keeping men's secrets. And recently with the victims' rights movement, survivors of sexual abuse, for better or worse, this is very contentious, are telling the secrets of men. And with that ruling, the balance of power shifts. The Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings shifted the balance of power. All the things that used to be okay for men to do are now not so okay. And this creates a sense of great anxiety.
Harassment and things like that?
Sure, but these are things that many men grew up thinking was a normal way to behave. I would say that, in your book, things like sexual assault, which used to be part of the dating process not questioned are now being questioned, and there's a counter-reaction against that. I think your book may be part of it, but that there's a sense of crisis, a sense of privilege being lost, a lost empire. Now, I think this is especially escalated in the last 2 years since the Hill Thomas hearing.
And you're coming along, and others are coming along to say, listen, this, as it reaches the bedroom, as it reaches this male-female sexuality coming together, that women are saying what?
Women are saying we like
it, we want it, we can
well,
meet
not just
you.
that, but we want to negotiate this sexual contract from a position of strength. And I think that a lot of new feminists, or sort of resurgent feminists, are saying we don't want to just be perceived as helpless, passive victims. We want to account for our victimization, but we also want to say we are curious, we are sexual, and this is part of our potency, and this is part of our humanity, and we don't want to be split apart. I think women are sick of being split into
we
two.
understand how powerful sexual power is, and I think that anywhere from what my mother was on talking about with you last month, genital mutilation is a great example of the extreme of a culture or of the patriarchy trying to restrict women's sexual power. Right. And that when you cut off a woman's genitals, when you cut off her access to her sexuality, whether that's through genital mutilation or any of the forms that we know it, then you are cutting off one source of her power.
Which is, I think, is the exact reason that there was such, I don't think glee is too strong a word to use in the Lorena Bobbitt case, because it was finally turning it around and saying, oh, we're cutting off the man's power. And I think that was something that when friends of mine, female friends of mine, would be gleeful with me about that, and I would say, that's a terrible thing, it's an awful crime, how could you do that? And they would make exactly that point. This has been happening for centuries in huge numbers, and you've ignored it. And I was like, well...
Which is all the more reason, I think, for victims who are starting to claim power to look and be accountable for their own retributive impulses, because the most dangerous people in the world are victims who think they can do no harm and who become powerful without creating a moral sense of both the angelic and the demonic in human nature and female nature as well.
I don't find it as easy to speak as if I was a category as you do, and I can't say we.
Which category are you in?
But I'm obviously in the category of straight white male person.
Right.
It's when people start talking about power, about the power that this gives me, that I begin to wonder if slightly too much of a compliment isn't being paid. Rather as when some women talk about the penis as a sort of mighty engine or cruise missile or something, you think, well, I wonder where they get this idea. But I do think there is, and the reason why I will speak for what I think many male, straight, white types do fear, is that there must be some relationship between this empowerment talk that they keep hearing and potency. There's got to be some hidden subliminal connection, some latent connection. There's got to be, they think. So they back off a bit.
So as women began to say, someone said that this whole thing has two parts. One, women are saying, I'm going to enjoy sex, and I'm going to enjoy sex on my own terms, and I'm going to make demands, and you're saying when that takes place, therefore, it affects, it goes to the heart of male performance and male potency and those kinds of issues.
The temptation is then going to be that of self-pity. You'll say, well, actually, I'm not all that powerful, and sometimes I don't feel all that potent.
Right.
And the male organ, for heaven's sake, is actually rather capricious, vulnerable,
So this is why it's especially...
I'm losing my thread here.
Wait, stop. Why are you both are sort of relishing and reveling in the fact that he's talking about male performance and male potency?
Male vulnerability.
And male vulnerability.
Women also want this organ to be in good shape, is what I'm saying. Because without testosterone, I'm sorry to say, none of us could be here.
Oh, well, that's very Pogli-esque. I mean, I don't think that, male testosterone has...
I don't find that any great insult, actually. But I mean, if she... I do think you don't have to be Camille Paglia or indeed me to say it's a truism. I'm making an animal rights point, basically. I mean, we are an animal species. Right. We are programmed to reproduce. Men particularly are programmed to inseminate. They can't, so to speak, help it. That's just as well, really, because without testosterone and erections and other things of the sort, none of us would be here. Now, I think that, rather as you pulled me up by saying there was feminism before the 60s, I'm quite ready to acknowledge, I think that point was understood before Camille Paglia.
Well, but
Wouldn't you agree to that?
Well, but I wouldn't say that, I mean, as in her point that, that push of the testosterone is what built great civilizations. I think that the relationship between the sexes, I think that communities, cultures, I mean, I think there are so many other elements to the creation of civilization and to our world as we know it, obviously.
That women are creating civilization out of their own erotic consciousness and erotic drives. But I think that you're very brave and honest, and I would like to see more of this in the 90s is a little sort of synthesis of the dialogue.
But aren't you saying also that part of with women's sexuality is also beyond enjoying sex and saying we're going to have it on some of our own terms? You're also saying that women engage in things that being a feminist forbids you to talk about before in terms of certain kinds of fantasies and a whole richness of sexual.
I do say that in Fire with Fire. I talk about how, even though I have been a public feminist now for a few years, one of the reasons I wrote this book, which in some way offends certain orthodoxies of some feminist discourse, is that I was uncomfortable not being able to tell all the truth about my life. And all the truth about my life isn't as prescriptively mutual and liberated as, you know, some people want to imagine sexual relations to be. All I mean is, just as you say, I say we have an animal nature. You know, I, for sexual passion, have done sort of abject things, and so have men, and you know, so does any human being. And I think that we've got to stop having these sort of Artemis-like demands for sort of sexual exemplariness, and start to have some compassion and even some sort of liberated enjoyment of the fact that it is not so straightforward, and that the desire to give and be given, to own, to possess, to yield is very much part of the dance between the sexes.
I think it's great that you're saying this, and I think it's great that you sort of, you know, complicated your position since you wrote The Beauty Myth. I think that this idea that men are also vulnerable and that women are also aggressive and that we all have these sort of passionate feelings and that everybody's sort of confused, especially when they're 17, that this should be, I mean, it's strange because we say these things and they sort of seem like a revelation. I mean, it sort of seems like, and to me it seems like this, we should be thinking about this as common sense. Like, men are vulnerable. Women are also aggressive. Women do have sexual desires. Some men don't always just want to have sex, and women sometimes also just do want to have sex, and some men do want love, and some women don't. And
God, how radical, huh?
Right, I mean, this is a radical position, which, you know, and certainly when I read that part of Fire with Fire, like, you know, I mean, I think this is great, and I think that this does, for whatever reason, you know, and something that I've been trying to write too, is something that needs to be said and needs to be looked at and complicated.
And let's also notice that, I mean, you were talking about why should men fear this, and just as you said, it is a deeply sort of submerged part of female consciousness, which is filled with desire and filled with creativity, is starting to emerge, and this has always been terrifying to men. All the more reason to create a feminism that is about dialogue and mutual respect instead of polarizing.
It seems to me that two things ought to be said. One is, for on the part of women, is that to do all the things, which the point you make is that you can be a feminist on the one hand and still have all of this notion of sexual pleasure on the other, and it doesn't have to, in a relationship with a man, and it doesn't have to, they don't have to be contradictory, and men have to understand that they can, in fact, explore new ways of, and participate in this, with even women being initiating and being aggressive and all of that, without it somehow being an assault on their maleness and manhood. And that's where we need to go. And if that's true, then we ought not have this conflict that you talk about, this rage that's setting in.
There will be conflict, but it need not be a war. In other words, nature is dialectical, right? And if you marry a man and a woman, you don't get a synthesis of male and femaleness. You get either a boy or a girl.
Right.
I think you were going to say something about power and balance.
Well, I'll come right back to it. Let me go first.
Sorry,
No, but finish your point. I'll come right back to it and then.
I'm happy to yield, but I was merely going to say that what I was said about Elizabeth Fox Genovese's point about all the men that there have to be in a woman's life, apart from sexually, and the number of masculine roles that men can play for women, holds true conversely. I mean, men have platonic girlfriends who they like, they have mothers, they have sisters, daughters even, things like that. Their relationship with women is always going to be extremely complicated, but you can't reduce it to a conflict of interest.
Rebecca.
Well, I'm just going to say we're talking about women coming into more sexual empowerment, and I think, you know, and I think we are changing the texts, and I think that's what's very important. As I look at this Playboy on the table, I think about
how about this Rolling Stone too?
And that Rolling Stone. I think about the ways in which we are educated to be erotic with one another, and the ways in which we are taught through our education, through our families, through pornography, through stories, through everything that we see and hear, how to be sexual with one another. And I think that it's wonderful for us to talk about being able to partake of gender roles and of power roles in our sexual relationships, but we also have to think about how can we change the things that we are being taught in such a way that we can eroticize, and this is something that Gloria Steinem talks about, eroticize equality. How can we start to add ourselves to the debate in such a way that these things, these images, what we see, what we learn, all change. And I'm not talking about censorship. I'm not talking about, you know, doing away with power differentiation. I'm talking about consciously trying to add new stories, other stories of
The
mutuality
new story
in
that's being
pleasure.
added right now
Go
is,
ahead.
is male objectification.
Well, tell me about that.
Well,
Yeah,
I know both Christopher and I have been approached to do Calvin Klein commercials for the Marky Mark. So, I mean,
Didn't know that.
Wow.
It's come to this.
Yes, it is. No, go ahead.
no,
talk,
but I
talk
mean,
about
exactly
male
that. Marky Mark on bus stops and videos with Madonna objectifying men, and that's sort of the next phase, which may not be actually any better. I mean, it may be
Exactly, and I don't think it is.
Yeah, I think it's part of the
It's just
reason
an
men are feeling so under siege. I mean,
equal
There's no
objectification.
difference than this. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, if you had
Marky,
Marky
whatever his
Mark
name
were
is.
on, Marky Mark were on that, it would
Yeah,
be.
see, I think objectification is an absolutely stupid word, and I'm fed up with it. I think it's being overused like empowerment. When I look at that picture, if you want to hold it up again,
Yeah, no, I think
I don't
twice.
regard
We've
Miss
given
Miss
Finch.
Crawford. Miss Crawford, what I see there is not just a sexual object, though undoubtedly she is an object. Everyone else is an object to everyone else.
Yeah.
But I also see a subject. I mean, she's a great subject. Sex is a great subject.
Right.
Women are, in male conversation, a tremendous subject. I'm told the same is true the other way around.
and
Yeah,
yet
well,
it's
she did make that point about
Subjectification. In other words, if people talked a
Britain.
bit less about themselves and how the personal is political and the whole area of contestation is all to do with their own psyche and their own needs and dreads and feelings, and a bit more about society
How much of
and
this?
others, I think we might get on a lot better.
At the same time, I mean, men have compared women to perfect ideals. This was the subject of
Here
the
she is
beauty myth.
quietly blushing, waiting to be taken. I mean, it's the
Right,
same old.
but the point is that when women are comparing men to perfect ideals now, and looking at Marky Mark sort of grabbing his crotch and so on, this is yet another way in which a male arena of privilege that has
Katie.
never
This
been
is a-
contested
I would
is
say
now
that
being
this is,
breached.
but let's not underestimate that men have always, I mean, the idea that men should be strong, that men should be physically strong, that men shouldn't show their feelings. I mean, men have always had certain kind of perfect ideals, which in their own way sort of oppress them, I'm sure.
But
You know, and the
set
idea
them,
that
absolutely.
Right,
But what's
Well, I
changing
don't
now
know
is that
if they
women
are-
are starting to set ideals, for instance, of male beauty, and they now have some economic power to have that actually mean something. And so now the power relation of a woman scoping out Marky Mark and saying, "Whoa, check that out," is going to make the man next to her watching television feel the kind of insecurity that heretofore only women have felt
Most of the
when men
people I've
looked at
seen
Playboy
scoping
in
out
the past.
Marky Mark, in fact, all the people I've seen scoping out Marky Mark, like all the purchasers of Playgirl, are men.
Oh, don't be fooled.
It's fine.
It's not just
that's
that
what
men
it
have
seems to me.
that men have set the standards for males. I think
I apologize to Mr. Mark for that. but
women.
think
I mean, for instance, Camille Paglia, to bring her back up again, suggests that the traditional male stereotype of men, that you should be a strong red butler who takes women by force because that's what they really want, is correct. So it's confusing for men if you hear that on the one hand, and then you hear the other hand to hear from radical feminists that your entire gender role is a social construct, and that in fact there is no difference between men and women.
Yeah. Oh, this is Captain McKenna.
And yes,
Can I ask? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm seeing men grope toward a new, they're trying to find a new image of masculinity that is responsive and nurturing but not wimpy. I'm seeing a whole spate of fatherhood films in which sort of very powerful male characters like Clint Eastwood are sort of taught how to love and nurture children and relate to women. Does that relate to the kind of groping in the dark that some men are trying to shed rigid armatures of masculinity and find something that's sort of a little better to take
Something
its
other
place?
than baying in the woods.
yeah. I mean, I talked to Clint right before I came on. He said exactly that.
You said, brother,
He said yes.
you and I together.
We're groping together
Yeah.
for the male.
No.
Drum for
But
me.
I think this is an interesting
Wonder
point.
who's
But
winning.
I don't know why that's such a hard conflict for most of us.
It depends on how much
Christopher?
trust. My God, I sound old-fashioned. I mean, and crusty too. But just like there used to be an argument, among feminists, but can it be true that the story of O was written by a woman? You must have all had this argument at some point and read it. And so I think it's very clear it was written by a woman. But I think it was written by a woman with men in mind. Some women will admit, we might even ask you, since we're letting it all hang out, to having rape fantasies that aren't completely pleasureless. But that's up to them. It doesn't mean that
Getting
that
into
doesn't
murky
mean
waters
that. No, I
here.
know we are. It doesn't mean, but they're entitled to do that. It may be pleasurable sometimes to imagine being ravished.
Well, no, but it's also
Doesn't
true that
that
since the
doesn't
little
mean that
girls
anyone
we
has
see
the right to
scenes
jump
of-
out while you're trying to get the groceries home and manhandle you.
But do know that part of the reason women have those fantasies is that Hollywood puts a glamorized, sexy rape in 1 movie out of 8. So little girls grow
I
up
would be
not seeing
very
images
surprised
of
if
female
that was the reason.
desire.
I've met women who don't
What
much
do
go
you
to the
think
movies.
is the
Yeah, you
reason,
think it's just
Christopher?
natural?
I don't know, but I have been told by women who trust me, in other words.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yes.
That they do have such.
And
Yeah, but these are
why-
not
fantasies.
organic.
And I think it would be insulting for me to say, "Oh, I see, you have those fantasies. You've been watching too many movies." That would be an
The
incredible
whole-
thing.
but
that would be a very
pleasure has
poor
been
reward for a
constructed.
woman revealing her intimate thoughts to you, wouldn't it?
I think what's more interesting is
Accuse her of being a cretin.
I just think it's obvious that when women have hot, erotic images of female desire and mutuality, they respond to those just as if all they ever get to see are glamorized rape scenes. That's how they imagine sexuality. Same with men.
But there's got to be some part of the human being that's not just the media. I mean, it's not just that we see this image of Cindy Crawford. It goes right into our minds, and we have
I think that men
I'm not
would
programmed
have
by
spirit, no
Hollywood to like
soul,
that,
no
for example.
intellect.
No, I hear you. I do think that
And
men
I
would probably have
that's a-
fantasies of yielding themselves and ravishment and being overtaken and swept away if they had access to those images too. I think that that's part of the human desire from
Right, you wanted
infancy
to make
to
a
give
point.
and
Well, you were
take.
asking what makes it so hard for men to reconstruct themselves, I think. Is that what you were saying?
Yes,
And I think
yeah.
it's really the seed, that masculinity as we've defined it up
I
until
mean,
now.
why is the alternative wimp versus being...
Well, it's the seed of your power, I think. I mean, I think that most male power comes from being in control, being superior over all of the other different people who are under, and to have a movement, a male movement that would force men to sort of abandon that falsely constructed notion of superiority would really be painful for a lot of men and very difficult. And I think that that is really a problem.
I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah. And I think that...
God, what does that feel like to lose an empire? What is that
Right,
like?
exactly.
It can be a
It
tremendous
feels like the
relief.
British in the
Now, this is
1946.
Speaking
Oh,
as an
that's
English
what it
person, I
is.
can say it
Interesting.
can be a tremendous relief.
I've heard this men who
relief.
had
Yeah, speaking as an English anti-imperialist.
I understand what
It is a
I
relief, at least
understand
when
the
women
metaphor.
go for certain things.
No, I wasn't suggesting that you didn't,
interesting.
but I mean,
I think
you might
some
not have
men-
known what my pre-existing attitude to
Yeah.
Some men
empire
who
was.
have read some of the new feminism say just that it's a relief to imagine that sort of strong women are sort of helping to dismantle the onus of having to do all the sex.
I think the way
or
it's
all
going to
the
work is that
economy.
women are going to, I mean, when you we're talking about earlier about whether it's being seized or negotiated, I think seized basically is the way it's going to work. I mean,
be seized, yeah.
I think,
But
I don't think
haven't the
men are, I don't
strongest-
think voluntarily.
Haven't strong
are
men
just
always like strong women? I mean, don't you think that's...
I think that's,
No. I
I
think
think that's a
that's
cliche.
interesting.
It's not,
I think that is a cliche.
not invariable, no.
You think that's a cliche?
Well, I think, what does that mean? I mean, I think when you're saying strong men have always like strong women, I don't know.
I don't think strong men have anything to fear from strong women, and somehow there is not an emasculation or a castration or whatever term you want to use from aggression by women being aggressive, women being honest, women being all the saying, I want
Well, if that's
I
true, we
want to
would
reach
have had
for
a
power.
woman president long ago. We would have had women CEOs long. I mean, if men
Only
really
if there were enough strong men.
appreciated...
Only if it's strong in the sense that you mean it, which I think is self-confident.
Right.
As opposed to strong in a sort of,
Insecure.
pumped up kind of
Right.
self-pissing.
And you know how
Right.
this
And
plays
there are
out
very
from a
few men who are sort of confidently strong in themselves and don't need to feel stronger than in order to be strong.
But let's acknowledge
I mean, that
something
seems like
else,
that's
is that
living in the
to live with someone who's really an equal demands a lot of consciousness and responsibility from women and men too. And I acknowledge in Fire with Fire that sometimes when I'm tired or worn out or having low self-esteem or whatever, I can imagine fantasizing the same kinds of idiotic fantasies of, being fed, having my ego be
absolutely.
fed by the opposite gender that men imagine when they think of Cindy Crawford on her knees
Or by
worshiping
the same
them.
gender.
Or by
I
the
mean,
same
you know,
gender,
I mean,
thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of either Clinton, but since we're on the subject, it's
You're not a
good
fan
stuff.
of
either Clinton.
either Clint Eastwood or Bill
No,
Clinton?
Hillary or
Oh,
Bill.
yeah, come to that
okay,
later.
all right.
But there is an attractive story about how they met, which is told by her. Well, just they're in the library, law library, I believe, and she gets up and walks over to this guy, Bill, as it happens, and says, "If you're going to keep looking at me like that, it's time you knew my name."
Go, Hillary.
No, that is a story about her that I've heard that I like.
Right, I do too.
Now,
Sexy.
when you think of what you
More
know
women
is
should
now,
be that way.
what is now going on in the libraries and campuses of this country, where men and women are sort of sitting on opposite sides of the thing,
Well, Katie,
looking
not
at
yet.
each other in
at
sort
my
of
school.
Listen, I travel.
juvenile fear. I'm glad to hear it.
I
But we
travel
know-
all over
we
the
know that.
country, and the far more common thing that I see, and I've been to like 40 colleges in the last year, is campuses where no one has ever heard of date rape as something that is not right, colleges where you don't mention this. It's a vested interest on college campuses to cover up sex crimes against women, because that's the last thing parents want to hear about, and you've got to address that economic incentive to play it down. And it's so much more common to hear about, the gang rape, and that when the woman tried to press charges, she was hounded off campus, than to hear about the, I think, quite rarefied situation that you
Well,
write
I mean,
about.
the pamphlets that I'm quoting are the American College Health Association pamphlets, which are given to every, which are in every health center, in every university, and
But
that
I
the
think
Take
you
Back
are,
the Night
again,
March that I'm...
re-victimizing the people that you're talking about. I think that when I got those pamphlets my freshman year at Yale College, I sort of briefly read them and thought, oh, how interesting. I mean, I didn't follow them as doctrine. I didn't get all worked up about,
No,
how
but I see students
disempowered
who
I
are,
was.
I see, I mean, there are students who are embracing these ideas. I mean, the play, which I quote, called Calling It Rape, which was written by a Harvard student, based on, where she starts out with To His Coy Mistress, the Andrew Marvell poem, as a poem about date rape and verbal coercion,
No, I don't
and
think
that this stuff is in student newspapers.
No one's
This
going to
stuff
disagree
is,
with you that
the
expanding
idea
the
that,
definition of rape and harassment is a bad idea. I just think that...
Well, many people do disagree with me. First of all, there's definitely people who are disagreeing with me with
Not about that
one.
point. No one's interested in seeing expanding of legal definitions of rape or sexual assault. But I do think that it's important to teach young women that saying a sexual no is one half and that saying a sexual yes is the other half. And I think we're probably all in the same boat on this one. Yeah.
You don't disagree with that, do you?
No, I don't. I do think that we have to be careful when we teach people about issues like rape and sexual harassment, that what we aren't doing is teaching women about their vulnerability and teaching men that they are aggressive and teaching women to, and this is precisely what I think you're talking about in your book also, is teaching women not to form an identity, especially a sexual identity, around the idea of being victimized.
I think
agree
with you about that.
This is really what I'm saying, and which has been distorted.
No, well, I hear you. I still think it's important to account for women's real victimization. But here's one example. The women at Brown University write the names of alleged date rapists on the wall. You might say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, come on, girls, get a grip. Get a grip. I would say that writing the name of an alleged attacker in a private feminine space where it's not fair to him, it doesn't do anything, and that these are the elite young women of the country, is stopping at victim feminism instead of moving on to power feminism, which is take over the university, put your tuition into escrow, march, etc., until you get decent, fair, honorable sexual harassment and date rape grievance procedures that are open and fair.
I don't know whether I think those names in the bathroom are going to mean anything. I don't know what you'd think about at Columbia, where they put posters with men's names publicly all over the campus, who are alleged date rapists.
There's a very important counterpoint to that, which offends a lot of civil libertarians of all genders, which is not the redefinition of rape, the redefinition of evidence, and the idea also that you can be accused by someone whose name you don't know.
Right, that's problematic. I think that
the anonymity of the one, in other words, corresponds to the proclamation of the other. You can be accused by an anonymous person. That's against the law. It's against the Constitution,
we're not really acknowledging the reality here, which is that in survey after survey, we're hearing things like, 51% of college men say that they would rape a woman if they could get away with it. 41% of women, 52% of men say that it's okay to rape a young woman. This is high school. It's okay to rape a woman if she got him excited. The study that
These
that
are
you
very slippery statistics, it's that Disraeli quote. There are three kind of lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Okay, that's not going to fly here. I'm sorry. You haven't read the primary sources. It seems there's masses and masses of evidence about this. It's something that you're found. It's smart. Look, it's smart to say that women should not create an identity out of their victimization. It is absolutely right on target, and we both say this in different ways. I say it in Fire with Fire that it's more socially acceptable for women to seek power through victim status than by saying, give me money, give me status, give me recognition, give me sexuality. But I still think that we can't build our castles on the sand. We have to acknowledge that women are victimized.
Let me just come back to Tad one more time. In this article that I read in Esquire, it's coming out in February, that tell me where, when you left that, having read this, having talked to a lot of people, including some people here at this table, where were we going? And you use this term, do me feminism. And you also talked to a lot of lesbians. You talked to, and a lot of people who looked at the gay lifestyle, and you incorporated a lot of this. Where did you leave it, and where are we going, and what was your sense of it?
Well, I think somewhat to reiterate.
I remember the last, to interrupt you, I remember the last point you made in the piece, as I remember it, was that, was a reference back to Lorena Bobbitt saying that a lot of women wanted it to stay attached too.
Well, I think saying that men prefer the penis attached, and the good news, I felt, talking with people like Naomi and Rebecca and Katie, was that a lot of women do too.
Right.
I think, to reiterate some of what I said at the beginning, the sort of the anger on the dark side has pushed things out to where we have the Antioch, and we have Ted Kennedy putting a bill through the Senate for stopping kindergarten harassment, and that pendulum has swung. But I think the pendulum is beginning to go back.
To be some bridge to the audience, the anger on the dark side had to do with the extension of where feminist thought was going in the 1980s.
Yeah, I think the sort of radical feminist idea that, to grossly oversimplify, that sex is bad and men are evil, and sex and pornography makes them that way, to sort of grossly.
Which is really a minority, you know.
Yeah, no,
it has been,
it
very
is.
It has been blown up in the media, but not
albeit
by
a minority, it was
Not by us.
influential.
Not by us.
And
you know,
here's my,
that's really important.
we've gone over this, but I want to just come back one more time. What happened to make people realize the need to write this kind of book? The last time this title will be mentioned on this book, Fire with Fire.
I think that
After 10, it's enough. But let me, what caused those who to recognize this, that to lead to the do me feminism? And you're one of them, so just quickly.
I'm not sure what demi feminism is.
Do me, D-O-M-E.
This is the word we use in the article on
Right.
we're doomy feminists.
too many
Yeah,
feminists.
you're do me.
Oh,
Right.
okay. I'm glad to know.
Our agents.
Well, you're present at the birth of a new phrase.
I
I
see.
think that for me, writing and becoming a sort of an out feminist had to do with hearing so much again and again that young women were not identifying with feminism, and feeling that that kind of alienation from a movement which has transformed their lives in ways that many of them don't even recognize, and that can further alienate them from activism or thoughts or ideas that could enhance the quality of their lives, made me really want to try to bridge it somehow, to try to understand where they were coming from, to try to put the feminism together with their lives and
Okay,
make
I
it
gotta
relevant
go.
again.
I'm out of time. I thank you all. Let me just mention Katie's book is called The Morning After: Sex, Fear, and Feminism on Campus, and Naomi's book is called Fire with Fire: The New Female Power and How We'll Change the 21st Century. Tad's article coming out in Esquire. You're coming out in Vanity Fair at some point.
Third
and,
Wave.
and Third Wave is Rebecca's organization, and I'll be here next time. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.